Jupiter stationing direct. Yay! It's that time of year when we've had so many planets retrograding, and one after the other, they start moving direct. And we can feel some joy, pleasure in that because things can start moving forward. They can start, in this case for Jupiter, expanding and growing again. So when Jupiter stations direct, this is happening on March 10th at 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time at 15 degrees of Cancer. We have been talking about Pisces and Aries. Aries is a fellow cardinal sign. And what that means is this stationing direct is in a square to everything that's happening in Aries. So we've been talking about 1 degree of Aries. It's a square by sign, but not by degree. So they're not actually acting on each other. And that's because we're let me do math here. We're 10 degrees away or 9 degrees away, way too far away for this to be in the orb. So it's by sign, not by a direct hit. So therefore, we wouldn't interpret them as having any sort of energetic impact on each other. We just want to know that these are, in a way, connected areas of life because they are in squares. I have a video on my YouTube channel, and maybe you attended the class, on when Jupiter stationed retrograde. This was back in November. So I recommend going to watch that if you want the full breakdown and what does the retrograde mean. And I'd like to remind everybody that you will hear, oh, the Jupiter retrograde is over. I always factor in the pre-shadow and the post-shadow. These are orbs. So yes, it is no longer in retrograde, but it's still in the orb of the energy. So it's not fully out. It hasn't shaken off that lived experience over the last several months. So when a planet stations direct, it is starting the post-shadow period. And so we look for that to be fully cleared when it exits that, and now it's just fully in direct motion and it's going over new degrees, and that's what we care about. That means it's really in the new chapter. For reference, historically, the last Jupiter retrograde post-shadow, because that's what this is a post-shadow period, was from February 4th to April 30th of 2025, and that was over in Gemini, and that's because Jupiter changes signs once a year. Currently, that change is happening in June. I expect in short time it's going to start shifting and moving, but it has been happening in June the last few years. So we can't look back to that to say, well, what was the last one like? Well, it was totally different. So you'd have to go all the way back to the last time that there was a post-shadow in Cancer for a full comp. And that's going to be 12 years ago. So ultimately, we can just think about it on the high level of like, what does it mean for Jupiter to be in direct motion again, but still in the post-shadow? And it means like it's starting to, okay, now I can start growing again, but it's trying to regrow, is trying to expand, add fortune, optimism, etc., into the degree points that it's already gone over twice. That was in the pre-shadow, and then that it retrograded over, where there could have been some shrinking, where there could have been some limits to growth. Something happened, and then it was like, no, don't do that. And you're like, oh, I thought it was supposed to be growing here. And so we're going over it this third time in the post-shadow. So it's our last round of like revisiting, and we're not going to hit any of these degrees until another 12 years from now when it gets back to Cancer. So because it takes a year to go through the signs, it's like this is the last time it's going to be going over this. And then it's going to go through the remaining degrees of Cancer, and then it's going to exit, and that's all going to happen in the next few months. So this post-shadow, if you want to look at the degrees in your chart, this is going to be, and I'll just put these actual degrees in the chat, because we have degrees and minutes, because that matters for granularity. We want to be pretty specific. So this is 15 degrees 5 minutes through 25 degrees 9 minutes of Cancer. So it's 10 degrees of post-shadow, which is significant. A sign is only 30 degrees, so it's a whole third that is in that post-shadow. And it's going to take from now, as in March 10th, until June 6th to move those 10 degrees. And then through the rest of June, it will move through the last 4 degrees of Cancer and then enter Leo. So I will, of course, talk about that transition when we get closer and we get to June. Something that we could do during this post shadow, which I often do for a post shadow period, is you're just reflecting. Okay, so this is round 3. What was that whole retrograde experience like for me? What was going on? What did I learn? In this case, where did I shrink? Where did I slow down my growth? And how could I start amping that up again? How could I take what I have learned since November, and in fact, since earlier with the pre-shadow? How could I take what I have learned to then have this last push? Because this is the last run. We're going to go over those 10 degrees, and this is the last time we're going to hit those for another 12 years. So we want to have our last push of growth and expansion there, and then we have those remaining degrees at the end where we're not redoing anything. That's the last growth in Cancer period for 12 years. But these are the last course corrections, adjustments to where we have been challenged a bit over the last several months. MC is in Cancer at 22 degrees. Okay, so when we're talking about the MC, this is a line. So if you're looking at your chart, we have the AC, ascendant, ASC, to DC, descendant. But then you have the vertical line. So these two are usually bolded. So you have the MC and you have the IC. And the MC is the topmost point of your chart. It usually falls somewhere between the 9th and 11th house in the, I think for most whole sign, it will just fall in the 10th house. So this is the peak of your chart. This is the peak of visibility of where you are seen. It's often associated with career, even if it in your chart doesn't happen to fall within the 10th house of career. So if this is in that gap, then what that is suggesting is that when Jupiter is moving over that degree point, regardless of which house this is in for you, this is a point of visibility. So I think it'd be very interesting if you went and you looked back at the other times when Jupiter went over this degree. So when it went over the 22 degrees, because this will be, as I mentioned, the 3rd time. So it already went over it in the pre-shadow and it went over it in the retrograde, and then it's going to go over it again in the post-shadow. So what you can do is you can actually look back to those 2 dates. So you can use a tool like AstroSeek, and you just move the dial starting well, before November, but definitely the retrograde one in November, and you just want to move it until it gets to 22 degrees in however many minutes of your MC. So when Jupiter gets to that point, look at that date, each of them, and reflect on what happened. That would be a great exercise to do for this post shadow. Say, okay, well, what came up for me? Where was I being pushed to grow? Where was I being held back from growing? Was I shrinking myself at all? Because we're talking about Cancer, how were my boundaries impacted? What was my emotional state? What was my intuition doing? And you can factor all of those in, and then that can, one, help you to anticipate what may come up when it reaches that 22, but also that you could use it to kind of put a button on everything, to close that chapter, to really integrate and process the lessons. And in 10th house, yeah. So that means it will apply to career, it will apply to reputation, public roles, perceptions. So how are people viewing you? What is it that you're putting out? How are you representing yourself? Or what is the arc of your career? So if you're someone who is in the workforce, thinking about that. And if you're not in the workforce, then it's thinking about your reputation. Like, what are your contributions? What are you known for? And those would be incidences that you could look back. You could check those 2 days and then use that to integrate, process, and or prepare for the final one, which you'd be able to calculate yourself with a tool like AstroSeek to figure out when Jupiter will reach 22 and change of Cancer. And then Lolo, that applies to you as well. So 10th house, minus the MC part, it's just still career and reputation. Where have you been growing? What lessons were you learning for the entire retrograde about where you were allowed to grow or not? About how much space you could take up or not. That's what we're thinking about whenever we have a Jupiter retrograde. And if it's in the 10th house, we're thinking about that career piece. Natal Jupiter at 29 degrees. So that's outside of the post shadow, but it's going to hit it right at the end. That's a really significant degree point. To have a Jupiter return at 29 degrees, the final degree of Cancer. So that will come in June. So that will be cast out. But yeah, that you'll want to circle that. You'll want to look, it's going to be in those days right towards the end of June when it's going to hit that. That's a significant portal for you. It's a energetic reset on your growth and about an ending, because it's the end. It's like, here's my one last push before it's not going to come back here for 12 years. So that's a really significant reset. And also you can think about this entire last year of having sign-wise a Jupiter return by in your natal chart having Jupiter in Cancer. How have you grown over the last year? And then it just gets underscored by the fact that your natal placement is that push in the final degree. Cancer rules my 12th house. South node at 17 degrees. Yeah, Marjorie, so that's in range. So same thing that I mentioned before, because it was in range, you can go back and you can find those other dates. But we're not looking for a career for you. We would be reflecting on the much juicier soul work. What's in the shadows? What do you keep separate? What do you keep hidden? What is your undoing? How are you connecting to getting in tune with yourself? Have you been getting comfortable with isolation, with being alone, with looking in the mirror, as in looking at your soul, the depths of your soul? Heavy stuff, important stuff, really important work. And so this retrograde, it would be really helpful to look back at the full arc. So what have you uncovered? What have you really, to your depths, learned about yourself and about maybe how you have held yourself back? That's a really important lesson for 12th house and for a Jupiter retrograde. So have you been making yourself smaller? Have you been allowing yourself to connect to wisdom, which Jupiter also represents some wisdom, to be able to really expand, to see yourself truly? But then it gears you up, because then it's going to move into the first house, which now is then visible to everybody else. It's how you present and how you appear. So doing 12th house work is really, really valuable. And knowing that this is going to wind down for you. And then when it goes into Leo, what you've learned over the last year, you can then harness to then say, well, this is how I'm going to now identify differently. I'm now going to present differently. I'm going to dress differently. I'm going to change my appearance, or like whatever it is, carry myself differently. We do that from this 12th house work when we go into the first house. So that would happen for you starting June.